What if a simple contract could change your life forever? Laura has always believed that love and business shouldn't mix. Cold, calculating, and a millionaire, she built her empire without ever depending on anyone. But when she finds out that, in order to inherit her grandfather's fortune, she has to get married for 7 days, she does what she does best. She finds an efficient solution. Lucas, an ordinary man, full of debts and with nothing to lose, accepts the proposal without imagining what he's getting into. 7 days pretending to be a couple. No involvement, no feelings. A perfect plan. Or so they thought. Because what began as a simple agreement soon becomes something neither of them could have foreseen. And when the deadline passes, will the contract really be enough to separate them? The silence in the meeting room was almost oppressive. Laura, dressed impeccably in a beige blazer and a silk blouse, kept her posture upright as she analyzed the papers in front of her. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, ran over the clauses of her grandfather's will. A man whose fortune had been built brick by brick into a financial empire. She expected something traditional, division of assets, instructions on investments, or even a philanthropic legacy. But what she found was a ridiculous obstacle, a condition that violated her impeccable logic. You can only inherit the entire fortune if you've been married for at least 7 days, the lawyer repeated, adjusting his glasses. Laura put the papers down on the table, controlling the wave of frustration that threatened to come over her. Is this some kind of joke? Your grandfather wanted to ensure that you experienced what he considered essential for a fulfilling life, the lawyer explained. He believed that you never prioritized personal connections and that you needed an incentive to do so. She took a deep breath. Of course he would do something like that. He had always encouraged her to live beyond business, but she had never let herself get carried away by sentimentality. Love was irrational, marriage was a distraction, and feelings just got in the way. What if I say no? The lawyer snorted. You'll only inherit 10% of the fortune. The rest will go to charity. The idea of losing control of the empire she had helped to expand was unacceptable. Laura needed a quick and efficient solution. Can I get married and then divorced? Yes, as long as the marriage lasts at least 7 days. 7 days, just 1 week, nothing beyond that. She didn't need a real relationship, just someone willing to sign the papers and keep up appearances for as long as necessary. That's when the idea came to her. A contract marriage. Laura slid her fingers across her cell phone and opened her address book. Looking for an acquaintance was out of the question. Getting emotionally involved, even in the slightest, was not an option. She needed a stranger, someone who wouldn't have any impact on her life when it was over. The solution came when his assistant, Marina, entered the room carrying a tablet. Is there a problem, Dr. Laura? She took a deep breath. I need someone willing to marry me for 7 days. Someone disposable. Marina's eyes widened. Isn't that illegal? Not if it's a well-structured contract. The assistant frowned, then sighed. I think I know someone. Across town, Lucas stared at the screen of his cell phone, confused by the message he had just received. I need you to meet me tomorrow at 9 a.m. It's a job offer. Unusual. He snorted. He knew that Marina, his childhood friend, was eccentric, but this seemed a bit much. Looking around the small, rented apartment, he felt the weight of the overdue bills. Ever since his dream of becoming a professional athlete was interrupted by an accident, he had been trying to keep his life on track. He worked as an app driver and did some odd jobs, but nothing that solved his debts. He typed quickly, "What kind of work?" The answer came within seconds. Just trust me. Go to the meeting. It could change your life. Lucas ran his hand through his messy hair. He didn't know what he was getting into, but at the moment, any opportunity was better than the emptiness in his bank account. And so, without imagining what he was about to embark on, he decided to go and meet the woman who would change his life forever. Laura arrived punctually at the cafe where they had arranged to meet. The place was discreet, far from the spotlight of the business elite she usually frequented. She sat down at a table at the back, ordered a double espresso and opened her tablet to review the contract proposal. She already had everything planned out. The wedding would be a simple arrangement. 7 days, no emotional involvement, no complications. As soon as the deadline passed, the divorce would be signed and her life would return to normal. She heard the cafe door open, and as she looked up, she saw Marina accompanied by a tall man in worn jeans and a simple t-shirt. Lucas. He looked out of place, but his expression was firm. He walked over to the table without hesitation, pulled up a chair and sat down. "So, you're hiring a husband?" he asked, arching an eyebrow. Laura kept her expression impassive. "I prefer to call it a business arrangement." Lucas let out a half-smile. "Of course, a marriage for 7 days. Nothing strange about that." Marina sniffed, trying to lighten the mood. "Laura, this is Lucas. Lucas, this is Laura. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to order a coffee." When they were alone, Laura slid the contract across the table. "It's all explained here. You will be my husband for 7 days. You will take part in some events with me, and at the end, you will receive your financial compensation." Lucas picked up the papers and looked through the clauses. "And exactly how much do I get?" 100,000. 50 now and the rest at the end." He let out a low whistle. "For 7 days of pretending. Not bad." "It's not just pretending. You have to follow my instructions, keep up appearances and act as expected." Lucas leaned over the table. "What if I make a mistake?" Laura crossed her arms. "You won't." His gaze flashed with silent defiance. "What if I want to quit before the 7 days are up?" She pointed to one of the clauses. "In that case, you don't get the second half of the payment." Lucas pondered for a few seconds, then threw the papers back on the table. "Sounds simple. So you accept?" He leaned his elbows on the table, narrowing his eyes. "Tell me something, Laura. Why not find someone from your own circle? Why hire a stranger?" She kept her gaze fixed on him. "Because it's more efficient that way. No complications, no expectations, just a contract." Lucas smiled sideways. "Do you really see it like that? As a business?" "Yes, I do." He shook his head, picked up the pen and signed the contract. "Then I think we have a deal." Laura took the papers, checked the signature and held out her hand. "Welcome to the most efficient wedding of your life." Lucas squeezed her hand, feeling the firmness of her touch. "It's going to be fun." She just arched an eyebrow, doubting it very much. The wedding took place at the registry office quickly and without any ceremony. Laura arrived on time, wearing a discreet beige dress and impeccable heels. Lucas, on the other hand, showed up in a blazer he clearly didn't wear often, and a blue shirt folded over his forearms. No flowers, no guests, no emotional vows, just signatures on a document that would ensure they both left with what they wanted. "I never imagined I'd get married like this," Lucas murmured, as the registry office official stamped the papers. "Neither did I," replied Laura, adjusting her cufflinks. As soon as everything was official, she put the marriage certificate in her briefcase and looked at him. "Now we have some rules to follow." Lucas smiled sideways. "I knew there would be rules. For a start, you'll be moving in with me for the next 7 days." He raised an eyebrow. "Really? People need to believe that we're a real couple, and couples live together. I thought we just needed to appear together at events. I don't want to take any unnecessary risks. And since I mentioned the events, the first one is tonight." Lucas massaged the back of his neck. "This is going too fast." "That's the point. We have 7 days. There's no time to adapt." He snorted, but didn't argue. Laura handed him a card. "Here's the address of the house. A driver will pick you up in an hour. I hope you're ready." She turned to leave, but Lucas called out to her. "Hold on." Laura stopped and looked at him. If we're going to live together for a week, I think I should know at least one thing about you that isn't in this contract. She crossed her arms. Like what? Something simple. Your favorite dish, for example. Laura hesitated for a moment, then replied, Coffee. Lucas laughed. Coffee isn't a dish. It's enough for me. He shook his head, laughing quietly. I think this is going to be the most interesting week of my life. Later, at Laura's mansion, Lucas walked through the huge living room, observing the sophisticated decor. Everything there seemed expensive and impersonal, as if no one actually lived there. So, where's my room? She asked. Laura, who was reviewing some emails on her cell phone, didn't even raise her eyes. At the end of the corridor, second door on the right. Lucas walked there and, on opening the door, found a luxurious but equally impersonal room. He left his backpack on the floor and let out a sigh. He still didn't know exactly what he had gotten himself into, but one thing was certain. This week had promise. The night came quickly. Laura came out of her room wearing an elegant black dress with an impeccable cut. Her hair was tied up in a low, sophisticated bun, and her heels echoed across the marble floor as she descended the stairs. When she found Lucas in the living room, she frowned. He was wearing a suit as she had demanded, but without a tie, with the first buttons of his shirt open. His blazer was slightly unbuttoned, giving him an air of purposeful carelessness. Could you at least try to look formal? He asked, crossing his arms. Lucas gave a half-smile. I am formal. I just don't look like a robot. She sighed, but didn't want to waste time arguing. She picked up her bag and headed for the door, with Lucas following her. In the car, Laura explained the rules once again. Tonight's dinner is a charity event. Many of my investors will be there, so we need to look like a convincing couple. Right. Do you want me to hold your hand, or should I just stand there like a bodyguard? Just act natural, and avoid talking too much. Lucas laughed. You really think I'm going to ruin everything, don't you? I'd rather not take any risks. When they arrived at the event, the entrance was a spectacle in itself. Cameras recorded the guests and the buzz increased as soon as Laura and Lucas crossed the threshold. He noticed the curious looks and surprised expressions. I bet no one expected you to show up married, he muttered. Not really, she replied, maintaining her impeccable smile. As the evening progressed, Lucas realized that the atmosphere was very different from what he was used to. People talked with measured words, calculated smiles, and veiled interests. Then one of the most influential investors approached, a tall man with grey hair and an analytical look. Laura, what a pleasant surprise! And who is this gentleman? She smiled, taking Lucas's arm more firmly. This is my husband, Lucas. The man raised his eyebrows. Husband? Now that's news. Lucas smiled and shook the investor's hand firmly. Good evening. And what do you do, Lucas? Before Laura could intervene, Lucas replied in a casual tone, I'm currently married to an incredible woman. It's a full-time job. The answer made some of the guests laugh, and even the investor seemed to be amused. Laura, however, felt a slight panic. He was improvising, but to her surprise, instead of suspicion, Lucas's spontaneous response broke the rigidity of the moment. Later that evening, when they were driving home, she stared at him in the car. You didn't follow the script. I just did it myself. It worked, didn't it? She took a deep breath, without admitting that he was right. Just be more careful next time. Lucas smiled, looking out of the window. Relax, Laura. I'll surprise you more often. The next morning, Lucas woke up to the unmistakable smell of coffee. He stretched out on the too-soft bed and looked around, still getting used to the luxurious surroundings. He put on a shirt and went into the kitchen, where he found Laura already dressed for work, holding a cup while reading something on her tablet. Good morning to you too, he said, picking up a mug. We have an event at noon. Wear something suitable, she replied, without taking her eyes off the screen. Lucas took a sip of his coffee and grimaced. Too strong. Then make your own. He laughed and sat down at the table. This event. What exactly do I need to do? It's a lunch with some investors. You just have to smile, be polite, and not spoil anything. So I'm basically an ornament? Laura looked up at him. Exactly. Hours later, in the sophisticated restaurant where the event was to take place, Laura was guiding Lucas among the guests. He noticed how confidently she moved, greeting each person with a calculated smile. When they reached the main table, one of the most important investors welcomed them with a firm handshake. Laura, always on time. And this must be your husband. Lucas smiled and shook the man's hand. Lucas, a pleasure. The investor looked at him curiously. How did you meet? Laura was about to answer with a rehearsed version, but Lucas beat her to it, smiling. It was in a coffee shop. She spilled coffee on my shirt and was so embarrassed that she bought me another. We started talking and, well, here we are. Laura almost choked on her drink. The investor smiled. So, it was love at first sight. Lucas looked at Laura, and for a moment there was a silent exchange between them. Something like that, he replied, with an amused twinkle in his eye. Laura kept her composure, but inside she was furious. He had improvised again. When the event was over, in the car on the way home, she finally exploded. Why did you make up that story? Lucas laughed. It was better than saying we'd signed a contract. She took a deep breath. I could have followed the script. I could have, but it wouldn't have been as convincing. Laura closed her eyes for a moment, trying to stay calm. Just let me know before you decide to change things. He smiled. I'll think about your case. She rolled her eyes, but for the first time she couldn't help a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. The next day, Lucas was surprised when Laura stopped next to his chair at the breakfast table and crossed her arms. Today, you're coming with me. He raised an eyebrow. Where to? I have meetings outside the office. It'll be useful if you start to understand my world better. Lucas laughed, leaning his elbows on the table. I thought my only job was to smile and look smitten. It is, but I want to avoid any further improvisations on your part. If you know how things work, you're less likely to mess things up. Lucas shrugged. That's fine, but I'm driving. No way. 2 hours later, he regretted having accepted. Laura was extremely efficient and methodical, moving from one meeting to the next without a break. Her pace was exhausting, and Lucas began to realize how dedicated she was to her work. In between appointments, while they were in the car, he decided to tease her. Have you always been like this? Controlling? She gave him a sharp look. It's called efficiency. Or fear of losing control. Laura sighed. I prefer to make sure everything goes according to plan. Lucas watched her for a moment. And when was the last time you did something without planning? She looked away from the window. I don't see the need. Lucas smiled, picking up his cell phone. Then it's time to change that. What are you doing? Taking us off course. Before she could protest, the car stopped in front of a lakeside park. Laura frowned. What are we doing here? Lucas got out of the car and walked around to the other side, opening the door for her. Give me an hour. If you hate it, we'll come back. Reluctantly, she got out. They walked to a kiosk where he bought 2 portions of churros. Really? She asked, looking at the sugar covering the sweets. Trust me. She took a piece, hesitantly. When she bit into it, her eyes sparkled slightly. It's good. Lucas smiled. You see, trying something new doesn't kill anyone. They sat down on a bench by the lake. For the first time, Laura seemed less tense, observing the people around her. Lucas watched her in silence, noticing how her expression softened. You work so much that you forget to live, don't you? She sighed. I don't see it as a problem. Maybe because I've never really tried to live." Laura didn't reply. For the first time, she didn't have a ready answer. And for the first time, Lucas felt that perhaps something was changing in her. The evening arrived with a new social event, but this time something less formal, an exclusive cocktail party at an art gallery. Laura was wearing an elegant navy blue dress, discreet but impeccable. Lucas, to her surprise, had followed the instructions and wore a full suit, no improvisations. "It looks like you've decided to follow protocol today," she commented as they got out of the car. Were you that surprised?" "A little," he smiled. "Maybe I just wanted to impress you." She rolled her eyes but couldn't hold back a small smile. Inside the gallery, ambient music and soft conversations mingled with the aroma of champagne served in fine glasses. Laura led Lucas among the guests, greeting important people. Everything was going well until a female voice sounded too close. "Lucas?" He turned and saw a blonde woman in a red dress looking at him in surprise. "Bianca." Laura watched the scene carefully. "It's been a long time," Bianca smiled. "What are you doing here?" Lucas hesitated, but before he could answer, Laura took his arm lightly and smiled politely. "He's here with me." Bianca looked at Laura in surprise, then at Lucas. "So, you're together?" Lucas cleared his throat. "Yes, we got married a few days ago." Bianca's face turned to pure incredulity. "You got married?" Laura noticed Lucas's discomfort. "Yes, we did." She smiled sweetly. "It all happened very quickly. When you meet the right person, there's no reason to wait." Bianca laughed, but the sound was forced. "Funny." Lucas has never been the type to believe in that kind of thing. Laura felt a little uncomfortable. People change. There was a tension in the air. Bianca seemed on the verge of saying something but opted to just force a smile. "Well, I wish you both well." As she walked away, Laura turned to Lucas. "Who was she?" He sighed. "An ex." "An ex from when?" "A few years ago." Laura watched Bianca from across the room. She seemed surprised by the wedding. Lucas let out a dry laugh. "I would be too." She arched an eyebrow. "Do you still have feelings for her?" He stared at her, and for a moment, a different gleam passed through his eyes. "If I did, I wouldn't be here." She didn't know why, but that answer satisfied her more than it should have. That evening, when they got home, Laura realized that something was different. Lucas, who usually made jokes to relieve any tension, was quieter. He went straight to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and took out a bottle of water without saying anything. She watched him for a moment before crossing her arms. "It's been strange since we left the gallery." He sighed, leaning on the counter. "I'm not weird. I'm just thinking." "About Bianca?" Lucas let out a low laugh. "Do you really want to talk about it?" "I want to understand what happened." He ran a hand through his hair. "We broke up a long time ago. She wanted something I couldn't offer." Laura narrowed her eyes. "And what was that?" Lucas hesitated before answering. "Stability." For some reason, that got to Laura. "So she wanted something serious, and you didn't." "It's not that simple." "Explain." Lucas sighed. "I had different plans. I didn't want to tie myself down to anything at the time. Then came the accident. My life turned upside down and, well, you know the rest." Laura looked at him for a moment. "So now you're here, in a contract marriage." He smiled sideways. "Life has a strange sense of humor." A silence fell between them. Then something unexpected happened. The power went out. The room went dark, and Laura immediately reached for her cell phone. "What happened?" Lucas looked out of the window. "It looks like the whole street has gone dark." "Great," she grumbled. Lucas laughed. "Is there anything wrong with being in the dark?" "Not at all. I just don't like the unexpected." He moved closer, his facial features softened by the dim light coming from the street. You really don't like anything getting out of hand, do you? Laura crossed her arms. I think I've made that clear. Lucas smiled. So, I guess I need to teach you how to take advantage of unexpected moments. She raised an eyebrow. How do you intend to do that? He took out his cell phone, activated the flashlight and pointed to a shelf. There are candles over there. She took a few and watched him light them. The flickering light illuminated his face in a different, softer, almost intimate way. Lucas pulled out 2 chairs and sat down, knocking on the seat next to him. Since we're without electricity, how about a game? Laura hesitated. What kind of game? Questions and answers. You ask me something, I answer. Then it's my turn. She sighed but sat down. That's fine. What else do you like to do? Lucas thought for a moment. I like fixing things. Mechanics, electronics. I've always liked understanding how things work. She hadn't expected that answer. That's interesting. Your turn. He smiled. Why haven't you ever gotten married before? Laura was silent for a moment. Because I never had to. Lucas watched her carefully. That's different from saying you never wanted to. She looked away. My turn. What would you have done if your career hadn't been interrupted? Lucas sighed. I don't know. Maybe I was still trying to prove something to myself. A new silence settled in, this time a comfortable one. For the first time, Laura felt like she was really getting to know Lucas, and that scared her. The next morning, Laura woke up feeling something unusual. Lightness. The conversation from the night before was still on her mind. She had never spent so much time with someone just exchanging words without a professional purpose. When she went down to the kitchen, she found Lucas making coffee. Good morning, he said, without taking his eyes off the coffee maker. Good morning. She poured herself a cup and watched as he prepared toast. Since when do you cook? Lucas smiled. Since forever. I just don't like doing it for myself. She sat down at the table, feeling the strange normality of the scene. He placed a plate in front of her. It's nothing fancy, but it's better than just coffee. Laura took a piece of toast and tasted it. It's good. Was that a compliment? It was a realization. He laughed and sat down opposite her. So, what are the plans for today, boss? She rolled her eyes but answered, We don't have any events today, just meetings at the office. Does that mean I'm going to spend the whole day without you? Laura frowned. Yes. Why? Nothing. I just thought you were used to my presence. She opened her mouth to retort, but closed it without saying anything. Lucas smiled. Ah, so I'm right. Laura took a deep breath. I have work to do. She got up and went to her room, feeling that somehow he had won that round. At the end of the day, on her way home, she found Lucas in the garden, sitting on the grass, tinkering with the engine of an old motorcycle. She stopped at the door. What are you doing? He looked up and smiled. I got this old bike from a friend. I thought it would be a good project to pass the time. You should be resting. It relaxes me here. Laura watched him for a moment before moving closer. Have you always liked this? Yes, ever since I was little. She was silent for a moment, then bent down next to him. Does it work? Lucas laughed. Not yet, but it will. Do you want to try calling? She hesitated. Do I? Yes. Just turn this key. Laura cautiously took the key and turned it. The engine coughed but didn't start. Lucas smiled. It's going to take a bit more work. She handed the key back and stood up. Good luck with that. When she entered the house, she realized that he was smiling, and that scared her even more. The 6th day of the wedding began with an unexpected warning. Laura was in her office when she received a last-minute email, a $1 million takeover bid that could change the course of the company. She read the details quickly. To close the deal, she would need to travel and sign the documents in person. This meant that the marriage would end early. She stood still for a few seconds, absorbing the information. This was what she had always wanted, a perfect, flawless deal. So why did she feel a tightness in her chest? She took a deep breath and picked up the phone. "Lucas, can you come over?" A few minutes later, he entered the room, wearing his leather jacket and looking relaxed. "What's up?" Laura stood up and crossed her arms. "I've received a business offer, but in order to accept it, I have to travel tonight." He frowned. "That means that our contract could end early." Silence settled in. Lucas didn't seem surprised, but something in his eyes changed. "I see." Laura tried to keep her tone professional. "It was a good deal. You'll get your full share." Lucas let out a low, humorless laugh. "So that was it for you? A contract?" She hesitated. That was always the plan. He was silent for a few seconds, then nodded. "Well then, I guess there's nothing more to say." Lucas turned to leave. Laura felt something tighten inside her. "Lucas..." He stopped, but didn't look back. "It was nice to meet you, Laura. Good luck with your business." And he left. Laura stood there, looking at the closed door, feeling an emptiness that shouldn't have been there. Because after all, everything had gone exactly to plan. So why did it feel like she had just lost something much more important? The house seemed bigger without Lucas. Laura tried to concentrate on her work, reviewing contracts, organizing meetings, but everything seemed empty. At first, she ignored the discomfort. It was fleeting. After all, she had achieved what she wanted, a perfect business with no distractions. But as the hours passed, the feeling of absence became impossible to ignore. He grabbed a cup of coffee and sat down on the sofa, where he used to leave his jacket. His scent was still there. She sighed. She picked up her cell phone, opened the conversation with Lucas, and typed a message. "I hope you got home okay." She stared at the screen for a few seconds, then deleted it. Laura Suto wasn't the type to send messages like that. But then why did she feel as if she had made a mistake? That same evening, Marina entered the office and stopped in front of Laura's desk. "Is everything all right?" "Of course, why wouldn't it be?" The assistant hesitated. "Ever since Lucas left, you've been different." Laura looked away. "The contract is over. I've moved on." "Are you sure?" Laura opened her mouth to answer, but nothing came out, because deep down she wasn't sure of anything. The next day, as she reviewed the new business contract papers, Laura realized that she didn't feel the same excitement as always. The words were there. The figures were solid. The deal was advantageous. But none of that seemed to matter as much as before. She closed the folder and took a deep breath. Then he picked up his cell phone, opened the conversation with Marina, and typed a single question. "Where is Lucas now?" Laura parked the car in front of the small garage in the neighborhood away from the center. She didn't need to check the address again. She knew it was there. Marina had given her the information a few hours earlier. Lucas had gotten a temporary job, helping a friend repair cars and motorcycles. She got out of the car and took a deep breath before entering. The smell of grease and metal overwhelmed her senses. At the back of the shed, Lucas was leaning over a motorcycle engine, concentrating. For a moment, Laura hesitated. She had never felt like this, nervous, unsure of what to say. But then he looked up and saw her. The relaxed gleam that was always in his eyes disappeared. "Laura?" She took a step forward. "We need to talk." Lucas took a cloth and wiped his hands slowly without looking away. "About what?" "The contract is over, remember?" She swallowed. "I made a mistake." He arched an eyebrow. "What kind of mistake?" Laura took a deep breath. "I thought the contract was enough, that when it ended everything would go back to normal. But it didn't." Lucas remained silent. She continued. "I thought feelings were a distraction, but now I realize that maybe I was wrong." Lucas crossed his arms. Are you telling me this out of regret, or because you really feel something? Laura looked him in the eye. Because I really feel something. For a moment he didn't say anything. He just studied her, as if trying to decipher whether it was real. Then he gave a half smile. And what's your plan now? She took a deep breath. I don't have one. For the first time, I'm just trying to see what happens. Lucas laughed quietly. That doesn't sound at all like the Laura I know. Maybe that's because you've changed me. He was silent for a moment. Then he slung the cloth over his shoulder and came closer. You know, I've spent these days trying to convince myself that you were just a contract too. But I think we were both wrong. Laura's heart raced. So? Lucas smiled. Then I guess we'll see how it goes. She let out a relieved sigh, and he held out his hand. But no contracts this time. Laura took his hand and squeezed, feeling the warmth and firmness of his touch. No contracts, and for the first time, she let herself feel it. A few weeks had passed since that conversation in the workshop, and Laura was still amazed at the direction her life had taken. She and Lucas were now together, not by contract, not for convenience, but because they chose to be. And to her surprise, this no longer frightened her. That evening, the two of them were on the balcony of Lucas's house, sitting side by side. He lived in a small apartment, very different from the mansion where they had spent their 7 days of marriage. But somehow, Laura felt more comfortable there than anywhere else. Lucas twirled the beer bottle between his fingers and smiled. So, what's it like living without a plan for every second of the day? She sighed, looking up at the starry sky. Strangely liberating. He laughed. I told you you needed to try things off the beaten track. She looked at him, an amused glint in her eyes. And what else do you think I need to experience? Lucas leaned a little closer. I think you should try being happy without needing a logical reason for it. Laura was silent for a moment, then she smiled. I think I'm trying. Lucas held her hand. And I think it's going very well. She entwined her fingers in his, feeling the warmth of his touch. I never thought I'd say this, but maybe my grandfather was right. Lucas arched an eyebrow. About what? About the fact that I needed something besides work. He smiled. I think he knew you needed someone to mess up your life a bit. Laura laughed. If that was the intention, it worked. Lucas brought her hand to his lips and kissed her fingers lightly. So now it's official. She smiled. Officially without contracts. He shook his head. And I'll never let you forget that you tried to pay me to marry you. Laura laughed, and the sound was light, genuine. She had never planned to fall in love, but for the first time, she was glad that something had gotten out of hand. The sun was beginning to set when Laura and Lucas arrived at the small cottage they had rented for the weekend. It was a simple house, surrounded by trees, far from the fast pace of the city. I can't believe you agreed to take a weekend off, joked Lucas, opening the door and walking in with the suitcases. Laura smiled, observing the cozy atmosphere. I'm still wondering how you convinced me. Let's just say that my persistence won out over your stubbornness. She rolled her eyes, but her smile remained. Over the last few months, her life had changed in ways she had never imagined. She had learned to make room for the unexpected, to enjoy moments without planning every detail. And above all, he learned that happiness didn't have to come with signed guarantees. Lucas lit the fireplace, creating a soft light in the room. What's wrong? He asked, noticing the look on her face. Laura approached him slowly, crossing her arms. I was thinking about how my life would be different if I hadn't signed that contract. Lucas smiled. You'd be a millionaire and alone. She raised an eyebrow. I'm still a millionaire. He laughed. But you're not alone anymore. She took a deep breath, feeling the truth of those words. Lucas pulled her close, holding her by the waist. Any regrets? Laura pretended to think for a moment. Only one. Which one? She smiled, having thought, for a second, that you were disposable. Lucas laughed and kissed her forehead. For someone who hated losing control, you did pretty well. Laura sighed. It's not so bad when you lose to the right person. He held her face gently. So I guess I can consider this bet won. She smiled and, without another word, kissed him. There, in the soft light of the fireplace, Laura was sure that, for the first time in her life, she had made the right choice. Not for money, not for convenience, but because she had finally understood that love didn't need contracts.